Welcome to Twilight Fables, where dark fairy tales twist and linger in the shadows. Tonight's tale is one of bargains and loss, where the price of greed is paid not in blood, but in fading touch. This is the Maiden Without Hands. The maiden was born into a house of silence. Her father had once been a prosperous miller, proud of the creaking wheel that spun ceaselessly over the stream. The sound of the water striking the blades was, in earlier days, the song of their livelihood. Villagers came to grind their grain, and he was paid in coin, flour, or sometimes small trinkets from grateful neighbours. But the wheel had grown stiff with moss, the wood swollen, the grain sparse. The kingdom was changing. Forests that had once been plentiful were being stripped to feed distant wars. Rivers were dammed or rerouted for nobles who sought fountains in their courtyards. By the time the maiden grew to womanhood, the mill was nothing more than a relic, a creaking jaw that chewed only emptiness. The father sat by the hearth each evening, staring into the fire as if it might return the things he had lost. He grew thinner, his back bent, his eyes hollowed. He spoke little, except to his daughter, who kept the small house clean, the garden tended, and the hearth lit, even when their bellies were empty. She had a quiet beauty, not the sort that invited envy or longing, but one that seemed fragile, almost transparent. Her hands were always moving, mending torn cloth, weaving rushes into baskets, stroking the heads of the goats when they bleated for food. She touched the world gently, as if by touch alone she could convince it to hold together. But one night, when the moon was thin and the wind rattled through the shutters, her father whispered into the fire. "If only I had gold," he said. "If only I had enough to feed us, to restore the mill, to be something more than this husk of a man." His words were not meant as a prayer, nor a bargain, but the air in the room shifted all the same. From the shadows in the farthest corner of the cottage, a shape uncoiled. The maiden felt it before she saw it, a coldness that pressed against her skin, a weight in her chest, like her breath was being stolen. A voice came, smooth as oil and soft as silk. "I can give you what you seek." The maiden turned, clutching the small basket she had been mending. There, half formed in the gloom, was a figure taller than any man, horns curled like twisted branches above a head that seemed both animal and human. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the firelight, though no flame touched them. The father did not rise. His face was pale, yet his eyes were wide and hungry. "You can restore my fortune?" he asked, his voice trembling. The shadow inclined its head. "More than that, I can give you gold enough to fill this mill until its wheel turns smooth and easy again. I can give you fields fat with harvest. I can give you a name that the villagers will speak with respect, not pity." The maiden clutched her basket tighter, She wanted to cry out, to tell her father that this was no gift, no kindness, but her throat felt tight, her tongue heavy. "And the cost," the father whispered. The shadow smiled, though its mouth did not move. "The thing you prize most, the thing that ties your house to fortune, the hands of the one who serves you." The maiden's breath caught. She knew then what it meant. Not simply her labour, not merely her weaving or tending. Her hands were her life, the way she cared for her father, the way she touched the world to keep it whole. The father's gaze flickered toward her, just once, like a man peeking at a wound he did not wish to see. "You ask too much," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The shadow leaned forward, its horns nearly brushing the rafters. "Too much? Or exactly what you are willing to give, in silence, so that you may live without hunger, without shame?" The maiden found her voice at last. "Father, no, you cannot." The father flinched, but he did not look at her. His eyes were on the fire, on the faint glimmer of gold that seemed impossibly to dance in its heart. The shadow straightened. "The bargain is sealed," it whispered, as though her father's silence had been enough. The fire roared higher, filling the room with sparks. The maiden cried out as the basket fell from her lap. Pain shot through her arms, searing, invisible pain, as though unseen knives were slicing her skin. She clutched her wrists, but her fingers felt suddenly foreign, numb and stiff. Her father cried out too, staggering to his feet, but it was not for her. Coins clattered at his feet, spilling from nowhere, bright and gleaming in the firelight. He gasped, fell to his knees, and gathered them greedily. The maiden watched, tears streaming as her skin turned pale and translucent. Her hands shimmered like glass, like smoke, like they were being erased from the world. She tried to hold the edge of the table, but her fingers slid through the wood as though it were mist. "No," she whispered, staring at her vanishing touch. "No, no, no." Her father looked up at her at last, his eyes wide with terror and shame. "Daughter!" But the shadow was already retreating, dissolving into the rafters. Its laughter was like the low moan of the mill wheel, slow and heavy, echoing long after it had gone. The maiden sank to her knees, staring at the faint shimmer where her hands should have been. She could not feel the floor. She could not feel the tears streaking her face. She could not even feel the beating of her own heart beneath her chest. The father tried to reach for her, but she recoiled, lifting her fading arms. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't touch me." You traded it away. The coins glittered between them. The fire hissed. Outside, the mill wheel groaned, turning for the first time in months. But inside the cottage, all was ruin. The next morning, the cottage felt unfamiliar. The maiden woke with her body trembling, her arms still faint and shimmering where her hands should have been. She tried to rise, but could not grip the edge of the bed. The blanket slid off her like water, and her skin prickled at the absence of sensation. She moved slowly, her arms limp at her sides, as though she were a child swaddled too tightly. Her father sat at the table, his eyes fixed on the heap of coins glittering before him. He had stacked them in neat piles, then scattered them again, as if afraid they might vanish if he looked away. His lips moved silently, counting and recounting. When the maiden stepped forward, her shadow stretched long in the morning light. "Father," she whispered. He flinched. "Daughter." The words seemed strange in his mouth now. He stared at her arms, at the pale ghost-like shimmer of her wrists, and looked away. "What have you done to me?" she asked. "I thought..." His voice cracked. He tried again. "I thought it would only be a promise, a test, that such a thing could not be real. But it is," she said. "I cannot hold a cup. I cannot work the loom. I cannot even feel the earth beneath my feet." He pressed his face into his hands. The gold clinked as his elbows struck the table. "I wanted to save us," he whispered. The maiden felt hollow. The hearth smoked. The wheel outside turned faintly, as if mocking her. She turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" her father asked, voice sharp. She paused, her shoulders stiff. "Away. What am I now? But a ghost in this house. Better that I vanish than haunt you with your guilt." She did not wait for him to answer. She stepped into the morning air, the grass wet with dew. She bent instinctively to brush the moisture from her skirts, but her hands passed through fabric as though it were not there. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to walk. The path from the mill led toward the village, but she could not bear their stares, their whispers. Already they had pitied her father for his ruin. What would they say of the daughter who returned unable to hold a single thing? She turned instead toward the woods, where the trees stood tall and close, where shadows might hide her shame. The forest greeted her like a stranger, branches arched overhead, clawing at the sky. The air smelled of moss and damp earth, and the sound of birds was muffled, distant. Each step carried her deeper into the silence. She brushed against ferns, and they bent away from her as though recoiling. She touched the rough bark of an oak, but felt nothing. She wept as she walked, her tears sliding down her face unchecked. She could not even wipe them away. By nightfall, hunger gnawed at her. She found a bush heavy with berries, their skins shining like drops of wine. She bent, desperate, and tried to pluck them. Her arms passed through as though the fruit were smoke. She sobbed, beating her useless limbs against the branches until her breath came ragged and thin. At last, she dropped to her knees, her face pressed into the earth. She opened her mouth and bit at the berries directly, teeth breaking through the skins, juice staining her lips. She ate like a beast, like a child, until the hunger eased, but there was no joy, no satisfaction. The act only deepened her shame. She curled beneath a tree, shivering. The night pressed close, filled with sounds she could not name, rustling, whispering, a distant cry that might have been an animal or something far worse. In her dreams, the shadow returned. It loomed tall, its horns scraping the stars, its voice echoing through her bones. "You see now what he traded," it murmured. "You see how little you are without the gift of touch." She shook her head, covering her face with arms that were no longer solid. "Leave me," she whispered, but the shadow only laughed. The sound low and endless. The days blurred. She wandered deeper into the forest, surviving on berries and water from shallow streams. She learned to bite fruit directly from the trees, to kneel and drink like an animal. Her clothes grew ragged, her hair tangled. She lost weight, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow. Animals avoided her, birds fled when she passed. Even the insects seemed to veer from her skin, as though she carried some repellent curse. Once, she stumbled upon a group of woodcutters. She froze at the edge of the clearing, watching them laugh as they swung their axes. She wanted to step forward, to beg for food, for shelter, but when one of them looked up and saw her, his face blanched. "Spirit," he hissed, dropping his axe. The others turned, their eyes widened. One made the sign of warding, 2 others clutched at charms on their belts. She raised her arms, trying to protest, but her limbs wavered, half translucent in the sunlight. The men shouted, one hurled a stone. She fled, crashing through underbrush, tears blinding her. By the time she stopped running, her chest burned and her legs ached. She stumbled into a clearing she had never seen before. There, in the fading light, stood an orchard. The trees were unlike any she had known. Their bark glowed faintly silver, as though moonlight had seeped into their veins. Their branches bent low, heavy with fruit that shimmered like crystal apples, pale and luminous. The air smelled sweet, a perfume that made her dizzy with longing. She stepped forward, trembling. Her hunger gnawed at her again, fierce and desperate. She bent beneath the nearest branch and tried to bite at the fruit, as she had with wild berries, but when her lips touched its surface, the apple did not yield. Instead, a pulse of warmth spread through her body. She gasped, stumbling back. The apple remained unbroken, but her right wrist, where her hand should have been, flickered. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw fingers, pale and thin, reaching out of the mist, but then they were gone, dissolving back into shadow. Her breath came in quick sobs. She sank to her knees, clutching the branch, though she could not feel it. Please, she whispered, her voice raw. Please, let me be whole again. Let me touch, let me hold. The orchard rustled, as if answering. A breeze swept through the clearing, stirring the branches. The fruit swayed, casting pale light over her face. The maiden closed her eyes, pressing her forehead to the tree. For the first time since her exile began, she felt something more than despair. She felt the faintest spark of hope. That night, she slept at the foot of the glowing tree. In her dreams, the shadow returned, but its voice was fainter now, drowned beneath the rustling of branches. You will not escape me, it whispered, but the maiden clung to the memory of that flicker, the almost hand that had reached for her, and though her body still ached, though she was still hungry and alone, she smiled in her sleep. For the first time, she believed the curse might be broken. The orchard became her refuge. Each morning she woke beneath the silver branches, her breath misting in the dawn light. The trees seemed to lean closer as days passed, as though listening to her whispered prayers. The fruit glowed with a steady light, brighter than moon or star, soft enough to soothe her heart, yet strong enough to cast back the shadows. The maiden dared to hope. The first time it happened, she had been kneeling beneath a low branch. She leaned close, lips brushing the skin of the glowing apple. She expected nothing but the strange warmth she had felt before. Yet this time, her wrist shimmered, and the faint shape of fingers appeared, ghostly, thin as glass. They lasted only an instant before vanishing, but she cried out, her chest bursting with wild joy. Every day she returned to the trees. She pressed her arms against the fruit, her forehead against the bark. She whispered her longing, her grief, her dreams, and slowly, almost painfully, her hands began to return, not fully. The right hand came first, translucent at the tips, then pale and solid at the palm. She wept when she saw it, fingers curled tight, trembling as though waking from a long sleep. She lifted it, astonished by the weight, the warmth. She touched her own face and sobbed when she felt the rough skin, the salt of her tears. Her left hand lagged behind. Some days it flickered faintly, other days it was nothing but mist. But she was no longer helpless. She could pluck fruit, cradle it, taste its sweetness like sunlight turned to flesh. Strength returned to her limbs. The forest no longer seemed hostile. Birds perched above her. A fox once watched her with curious eyes before vanishing into the undergrowth. The air seemed gentler, carrying scents of earth and bloom instead of rot. Yet she was not free. Each night the shadow returned. It came at the edge of her dreams, taller than the orchard, its horns scraping the sky. Its voice was colder now, sharper, like iron dragged across stone. You think you are free, it whispered, You think fruit and prayer can undo what is sealed? The maiden shook her head, clutching her half-restored hand. I will be whole again. You cannot stop me. The shadow's laugh rattled the branches. Your father's bargain cannot be unmade. Gold is spent, the wheel turns, and you are broken. You will never hold the world as you once did. But the maiden no longer trembled. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, the shadow came not in a dream but in waking. She was seated beneath the orchard's heart, her right hand cradling a silver apple. When the air thickened, the branches stilled, the birds scattered. From between the trees, darkness poured, swirling like smoke until it took shape. The figure stepped forward, taller than before, its eyes burning with hunger. You defy me, it hissed. The maiden rose, her knees shaking but her gaze steady. I survive you, it sneered. Survival is not freedom. You are half-formed, a ghost clinging to fruit. You cannot leave this place. Without the orchard, you are nothing. The maiden lifted her apple. The light caught her face, pale and radiant. Then let this place be enough. The shadow recoiled, as if the glow had burned it. You cannot bind me, it snarled. No, she said softly, but I can endure you. She pressed the apple to her left wrist. Pain shot through her arm, sharp and searing. She cried out, nearly collapsing. The shadow surged forward, its horns scraping branches, its hands stretching like claws. But the orchard moved. Branches swung low, swatting at the darkness. Roots heaved, splitting soil. The trees groaned, their glow flaring. The shadow shrieked, stumbling back as silver light spread from the fruit into the maiden's arm. Her left hand formed, pale, trembling, but solid. She gasped, clutching at the grass, feeling the blades cut against her skin. She wept, laughing through her tears, both hands whole. The shadow writhed, its body unravelling like smoke in the wind. This is not the end, it hissed. You're still marked. You will never be untouched by me. And with a final scream, it dissolved, scattering into the night. Silence returned. The orchard glowed brighter than ever, as though celebrating her triumph. The maiden fell to her knees, pressing her new hands into the earth, clutching fistfuls of grass, soil, stones, the roughness, the weight, the sting. All of it flooded her with joy. She touched her face, her hair, her arms. She pressed her palms together, marvelling at the warmth. She lay against the ground, laughing and sobbing. Her fingers curled into the dirt like roots. For hours she remained there, relearning the world through touch. Every sensation was a miracle. The cool wind on her skin, the tickle of ants crawling past, the smoothness of the silver apple cradled in her palm. When dawn came, she rose, her hands steady. She looked toward the path beyond the orchard. The forest stretched wide, the village somewhere beyond. She thought of her father, of his greed, his shame. She thought of the villagers who would call her spirit monster, cursed. She did not know if she would ever return, but she knew this: the shadow no longer ruled her. She could hold the world again. She could choose her path. With a silver apple in her hand and the orchard's glow at her back, the maiden stepped forward, and for the first time the world felt real beneath her touch.